new voices on the Zoom today. Both Ben Brandes and Jason Costi, both gurus. Ben is a managing partner at Accordion Partners based in Boston. And Jason was an operating exec at Casper, but now doing some new and fun stuff around how do you actually operationalize finance and cash flow. It's based out of New York. And like I said, if we have time, we'll see if we can get Alex Lazarow in. He's an adjunct prof at a couple of universities teaching business stuff. But the big reason for having him on is he just published a book called Out Innovate, talking about companies outside of the Bay Area and how they're being successful. And one of the great chapters in that book is around distributed workforces and remote working, and some really awesome lessons learned there. We'll send you the link out for the book and hopefully be able to get some nuggets from Alex before the session's over. Is that clear for everybody? If that, we're gonna jump in.
Give me share my screen. Okay, go.
All right, cool. And Adrian, I've got your slides embedded here, just so you're aware.
I changed a few before. I sent you the updated version, but I can use mine if you want.
Yeah, we'll roll through and feel free to ad-lib. Wanted to give you an update on the Red Mass project kicked off by another one of our gurus and our founders, Michael Stizgens. We just crossed 150,000 masks now delivered to Canadian and largely Northeast hospitals. Some really awesome work that was done here, including some picked up by the press. One of the things that we've decided to do, and Michael's celebrating Passover with his family today, so won't be joining us, but is we're probably going to wind down the focus on PPE. And one of the lessons was, although this was an awesome way to stop gap and fill needs, especially in the New York area, with the amount of government activity and big donors now coming at the problem, and the states kind of competing with each other for supply, you have this inadvertent impact where you're driving price up on the things that are needed the most. So although the need has not gone away, our focus as a community is going to shift away from PPE. Michael's still got a GoFundMe. You can see the link up here for some New Jersey hospitals that are having a hard time getting supply that are not in the wealthiest areas. So there's still gaps and needs. Okay. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about is some things since we met last 2 weeks ago on a different way for us to lean in and help the frontline workers. Ninth Decimal, another portfolio company, has done an amazing amount of work working in getting meals to first-line workers. Delivered a little over 1,000 meals in Boston and Chicago just in the last week. The reason why meals matter is, as you can imagine, with COVID in the hospitals, it's difficult for the health workers to move around. Certainly can't use the normal places that they go to eat, and they're doing long shifts also. So this was really an amazing initiative by 9D, and they're working to ramp that up. You can see some of the notes back from the hospitals in both Chicago and in Boston in appreciation of it. The other thing I want to talk about is this wheel, which is looking after ourselves, our families, our communities, and the companies. I think all of those things are important. I'll be the first one to say that all of us are sort of neglecting some of these things, and it's not quite balanced. I, on the personal side, was not exercising in a stressful situation. That's not a good idea. The good Dr. Rawlinson kicked me in the ass and made me join some virtual bike rides at 7:30 in the morning with a bunch of other folks. So that's a shot from the bike ride this morning. So we're actually going to try to combine these two things and do a community Red Mass ride to raise money for first-line workers to get food into their hands while they're working hard on their shifts. So we've already got coordinators in New York, San Francisco, and LA. We're looking for one in New Orleans. K.O. Kandak, I saw you on the Zoom. Could use your help, getting food on the ground. The good news is we also have Panera and Dunkin' Donuts leaning in, so your dollars go a lot further than normal. So want to thank Adrian for kicking me in the ass on the personal front. And
Happy to do that, Chris. And also,
Sorry?
we know the CEO of the LCMC Health Network, which are about 5 hospitals in New Orleans there. So we could chat offline on what types of things we can do to actually help the hospitals there as well.
That would be awesome, man. I really appreciate you volunteering to do that. So with that, we're going to go into a lightning round, speaking of Adrian. So we'll send more information out on the Red Mass Ride. We're going to do the first one next Friday at 7:30 a.m. If you can ride all levels of riders, Adrian.
Yep, all levels, old spin bike, old trainer, pelotons accepted, anything. We have one guy joined on a rowing machine, so whatever piece of equipment you can pull together.
And there's a link here for the GoFundMe. So whatever you would have spent on an exercise class, I can vouch for Adrian will kick your ass and you get a good workout, if nothing else. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the good doctor.
Okay.
So we're going to do this as a lightning fast, but Adrian, I'll let you kick it off and just let me know when you want the slides advanced.
Can I share my screen? No, I cannot share my screen with other. Oh, can you?
I got all your slides actually.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to go through these slides really quickly. I'll share the slides with you afterwards. I just put together some data, some updates. Obviously, things are changing rapidly. Next slide. This is kind of what we're facing right now. So escalating deaths, over 1,000 deaths a day from corona, very close, getting up there with leading causes of death, heart disease and cancer. Next slide. Here's where we are today. This is the US view, 461,000. This was compiled yesterday, so it's obviously gone up since then. 184 different countries. Doubling time is kind of worrisome. US is doubling in every 5 days, whereas Italy, where they had a real issue, they were only doubling every 11 days. So this is real, guys. This is still escalating. Total confirmed cases are obviously escalating in the US as we speak. There is some talk of a slight flattening of the curve in New York. I think that might be a little bit of false hope, to be honest. I hate to be negative, but you may find it will sort of blip up and down. That's because people are actually coming off ventilators. Some people are still on ventilators from a couple of weeks ago, which shifts the numbers slightly. So next slide. Unfortunately, we still have some states who don't have strict stay-at-home orders, and consequently their case rates are seen here. I actually wrote to a couple of congressmen to try and push this forward to implement, more strict stay-at-home measures. Hopefully that will change in the next few days. Next slide. Okay, some interesting data for the data geeks out there. This is some of the work from Google looking at location services on your phone. If you can see here, this is comparing San Francisco to Richland County, which is South Carolina. And you can see, for example, retail and recreation down 75% in San Francisco, but only 43% in Richland County. This is really interesting data to see, who's implementing good social distancing, who's following the rules, and where the gaps lie. So I'll leave you to sort of, if you go to the website there, you'll see the data. Let's just flick over this slide for the moment. Next slide. Okay. Again, we're tracking low as regards tests per million people. US is down there with France and the UK. Still a long way from South Korea, Italy, and Germany in particular. Next slide. Tons of diagnostic tests being looked at right now, most of them in what's called PCR space, which is a DNA amplification test, looking at different response time, results times. If you go to the next slide, I tried to put all these on one slide. Whoops.
I did it for you, I think.
Oh, okay. There's probably a lot of information to take away on that slide. I would probably go to the website and take a look at that in more detail. But you know, lots of different initiatives around treatments and vaccines. Next slide. I mentioned this last time, and this seems to be gaining some traction. There are some interesting studies around what's called serology testing. This is an antibody test, which may prove to be useful when we start talking about return to work. Healthcare workers can probably undergo this test to make sure they're immune. It's also a good test to evaluate the vaccine efficacy. It's still under development, and you might find people trying to sell stuff like this online, so beware, because some of them are not great tests. Next slide. Not, as I say, not broadly validated as yet. There are some false positives because it reacts with other viruses, and it can't be used to diagnose COVID-19. But there is some interesting work in this space, so watch this space. Next slide. I did mention this last time, and this is actually very encouraging. We are starting to look at convalescent serum. So people who've had COVID-19, who've produced antibodies, we're able to extract those antibodies and use them in high-risk cases, healthcare workers, sick people, as a treatment. One person's serum can actually treat up to 100 people. So this is incredibly encouraging, and Hopkins are kind of leading the way in this. So very interesting stuff happening there. There's some new stuff around masks. It seems like that if there's one good thing that's happening in this country, people are actually promoting masks more than in Europe, for instance. Whether they're doing a good or not is still up for debate. There's an interesting study came out that actually it does actually, the N95s certainly do help, but something seems to be better than nothing. So if you don't have a mask, wear a bandana or whatever you can, particularly if you go grocery shopping. Next slide. This is an interesting topic that people are starting to talk about. I tried to highlight things that people are not talking about, and this seems to be one. Where there's a massive population here that's at risk for various reasons. They have comorbidities, and obviously in a closely knit environment, this could be a big issue. Next slide. So we're looking at, there are people looking at mitigation measures for jails and prisons, so-called decarceration, educating police and courts, etc., reducing arrest time, particularly for low-level crimes. Next slide. And again, education, really important, training staff, access to rapid testing because it's a high-risk population, PUIs, person under investigation. Obviously, we need some, there is some work underway to address that. Germany's death rate is very low, primarily because of aggressive testing and tracking. They're very good at tracking people, high rate of testing, plenty of ICU beds and ventilators apparently in Germany. And there seems to be a lot of trust in Angela Merkel in particular, who's seems to be dealing this incredibly well and is providing good evidence-based information for the population.
I added this slide, which is another take on Adrian's slide on comparisons, but this is just the data from Seattle versus national data.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is, if you look at things like grocery stores nationally, there was actually a decline. This goes to March 15 versus Seattle. There was a huge uptake. You see the shopping mall curve down now almost 80%, across the board in the country. Movie theaters, in Seattle, also down almost 90%. Bring this up for two reasons, and we'll get a bigger or better update in 2 weeks from the Ninth Decimal team that produced this info. One of it's around, where are we in social distancing now to flatten the curve? And then as we think to the fall, hopefully about, what does it take to reboot work? and how do these behaviors change? Because I think, people that used to go to malls and grocery stores and movie theaters may not do so going forward. If you look at the airport data, it's actually even bigger. I think it's down almost 86% across the US. San Francisco and Seattle airports down 97%. So lots of different things to take away from the data side of this, both in the short term doing the things that we need to do, but also coming out of this from a business perspective. I'll turn it back to you, Adrian.
Again, more of the same, really looking at the way that we are shopping, the way that we are procuring products. Aerosol disinfectants up 385%. So if you have stock in Lysol, or if you don't have stock in Lysol, I suggest you buy some. Next slide. Again, more interesting data on purchasing trends. Oat milk, for example, for some reason, 347% up. And then obviously things like dried fruit, dried products. Next slide. And interestingly, dumbbells up 725%. So maybe people are starting to work out a bit more. For some reason, vitamin C is up there. No proven efficacy that vitamin C does anything at all. So creates very expensive urine and nothing else. Then bread makers, apparently, a big trend in bread makers. I want to finish with this slide, which is actually produced by a friend of mine who's a physician in San Francisco. Basically, I'll let you guys read this, but this is some words of wisdom from her. And ultimately, we're all in this together. Let's choose awkward, brave, and kind, and let's choose each other. So thank you for that, quick run through. Any questions, just send me an email after we're done.
Adrian, thank you again for everything you're doing for us as a community and for everybody, both on the personal and on the keeping us informed for our families. So really appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you.
Could I ask Adrian a question?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Bob.
So of all the so-called drug treatments that are pipeline, are there any that are promising enough that they might come about in
I did have a slide of that. I think I sent Chris an update. There's
it's in the it's in the appendix.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So that's the treatment.
My eyes aren't good enough for that slide.
So just go back a slide. That's vaccines. Diagnostics. Go back.
I was looking at treatment.
I have treatments.
23 different things under review. You'll see chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine in there. Antiretrovirals. There isn't one agent that's rising to the top right now. To be honest, I think we're grasping at straws with a lot of these. Some of the studies on chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine do show a decreased viral load, but the question is, does that equate to decreased mortality? The answer is we just don't know. Lab values can change and measurements can change, but ultimately we want to make an impact on mortality, which is very difficult to do in the short term. So this is what's underway right now. Multiple agents being looked at, but no one promising thing. The promising thing about vaccines, if you just go back a slide, is the top one there, Moderna. They're actually launching a vaccine without doing any animal studies. They're going straight to human volunteers, which is kind of pretty risky, not really been done before, but they're trying to fast track the vaccine. So watch Moderna. They seem to be leading the way as regards pushing vaccine, but there isn't going to be a vaccine for several months. I mean, we're talking end of the year at the very earliest.
I've understood that China is running a whole series of trials on these treatments, and then they will have data back in a month, or is that wrong?
Well, the answer is we just don't know. There's a lot of discussion about what's coming out of China, but they don't seem very willing to give up their data. The reason is probably because the data is not really showing anything positive, and they don't want to be seen as failing, which is the Chinese, way of contributing to medical research, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Great question, Bob. Any other questions before we shift to Ben and Jason? All right, hearing none, I'm going to move over to Ben and Jason. So Ben, Jason, thank you again, guys, for taking the time. I think one of the things, and this kind of relates to Adrian's slide, is really the unknown duration here and what that means for companies in terms of their cash flow planning. And so maybe I'll just kick it off with that question, which is, how are you guys thinking about this as a V versus a U versus an L recovery? And what does that mean for planning from a cash perspective?
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting us. I'll just quick it off with a 30-second view. I personally don't see this as a kind of a V shape. Nobody really knows, and I think the Fed has been faster to react than we saw in 2008. They're trying really hard to stabilize the situation. But as you keep seeing kind of more and more announcements around the layoffs and these industries that we talked about that were shut off, and we're seeing, a lot of susceptible people that did not have savings, that are facing, challenges to get paycheck to paycheck and feed their families and the like. It's going to be hard to see how all of a sudden, as Trump said, that it's going to be a miracle, we're going to open up, that the business is going to go back to normal. We're still trying to figure out what that is. So my personal view is that it's not going to be this view that there's going to be this slow start as people are wary as they take their next step into the economy. And so I don't think it's a V. I don't know if it's a U or some other shape, but I think we're going to see this the impact last for a while.
Ben?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Thanks, Jason, and thanks for the update on the medical conditions before. Before I jump in, I do want to say something is that I did celebrate Seder last night. And I switched a couple of plagues out for COVID-19. So I don't know if that could help.
Hopefully
but
the rivers,
I'm doing my part in anything, including praying.
Hopefully the rivers don't turn red, because I think we've hit everything else. There's locusts in Egypt.
That's why I keep my windows shut. In any case, agree with Jason. Who knows? I've seen the letters U and V, and I'm kind of thinking W, upside down S, a whole different dynamic to this.
Hopefully it's not L.
Yeah, well, right. You don't even want to say that.
Yeah.
What I do know is that you got to plan for all of it. And that's what, that's what we've been doing at my company, Accordion, is, typically we've looked at the V and have had scenario planning for the V, but we're flexible enough to determine inputs based on 6 months, 18 months, 24 months of downside scenarios and what that entails. And you're not going to know for 24 months maybe, because this virus could come back harder. So there's so many different scenarios that we've just never envisioned. Maybe we should have envisioned and planned for it, but we haven't. So that's the challenge. So I would just say that I plan for the worst and hope for the best, and run analysis to show that.
So it sounds like both of you guys, and I know we talked about this before, but if the company's got less than 12 months of cash runway view, your advice has been, all the lights on the dashboard should be blinking red right now. And is that sort of a consensus view for you guys? I know every industry, every company is a little bit different, but and then if those lights are blinking red, what do you do about it, I guess is the next question.
Jason, you want to go first on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you caveated it well by saying not every company is the same. I mean, I will say that this also is, as much as it's a dire situation for some and a challenging situation for others, right? There's a whole spectrum. If you're a casino or a cruise, you know, you're done. Your business is, you know, shut down effectively. And then there are others that face some fall off. There are some businesses that will see incredible opportunities in the current environment. And so I think if you fall into the one that faces the next 3, 6, 12 months with uncertainty of not knowing how your customer is going to come back, of maybe having some structural impediments to delivering your service and it's non-core, then I would exactly say what you said, which is, yeah, you got flashing red, because not only do you have to focus on your business execution and things that you can control and things that you can't control, so revenue or OpEx in the control side, you also have a whole new world around the venture capital community, because these businesses aren't in a world where they can cut themselves, you know, to remain kind of break even or something. They need to react to the game as well. And so it's unclear how the VC community interacts. Obviously, good companies or great companies will always find capital. But for the others, it's, yeah, I would see flashing red lights, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, and before I answer this question, I do want to acknowledge that I have a colleague on the phone, Brandon Beal, who is an expert at some of these scenarios and whether it's flashing red within 3 months or 6 months or 12 months. But I would say that, look, in April, everything's flashing red. You know, I just don't know when it's going to turn yellow or green. You know, one of the advents of a 13-week cash flow was because folks felt that they may break covenants in their banks in the next quarter, and they really need to hit some of these levers on cash flow hard now. So that's only a quarter in advance, Chris. It's not even 12 months in advance.
Yeah.
So imagine if now you're opening your eyes and say, oh my goodness, I might be in a U for 24 months. I got a plan for that. You know something? That's a better situation when you know that you've got a plan for 24 months versus breaking covenants and going back to your equity sponsors in 3 months.
So Ben, I'm just going to shift to this one slide from JP Morgan, which I think, you know, is a good sort of visual framework of what we've been talking about. We had counseled, I guess, that, you know, all of the portfolio companies to really look at an 18-month runway back in November, and I think thankfully most of the companies were able to do that. Like we're sitting around 21 months of runway coming into the year. But I think one of the things that you're pointing to, Ben, is like, you know, your 21 months in December is not your 21 months sitting here in April of 2020, because, you know, revenue may be changing. And then how do you, I guess maybe both you and Jason, I think, you know, had some ideas on how aggressive companies should be on managing cash and associated obligations, I guess, with banks and other lenders with the rent, et cetera. What are your thoughts there on how do you get back to 21 months?
Yeah, I'll go first on this, Jason, let you follow on, because you already alluded to something earlier. Is, yeah, there's some and I think there was a little discussion on this on the last call, Chris, as well. Is look, there are levers that owners are taking now, whether they're red, yellow, and green, whether they view their company, whether it's VC firms or private equity firms, and we work with a lot of both, even in the green, okay? And these are like the technology companies. These might be the Zooms of the world. They're still pulling down their revolvers. They're still accessing credit and cash where they can. They're still deferring rent payments and cutting salaries. So even if you're above that point, your goal is to conserve cash at this point until lockdowns end, until people feel safer, doing everything you can, regardless of what color that you feel that your company is in. Okay, so we don't have to go through all the levers now, and both Jason and I are happy to kind of send probably further information on that. But yeah, there's a top 6-ish that every company that we've talked to is taking care of. And it includes their basic expenses, which is payroll and rent, their financing needs in terms of liquidity and interest rate, their inventory planning, their product purchases, their deferment of CapEx. So I don't know how many I mentioned. That's like 6. Mm-hmm. Every company that we've talked to is taking care of those 6 first to make sure that they can match this out, because you're not going to know until after April, possibly May, really when do you start to kind of begin the actual planning again that's actually going to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think that, the companies that you're seeing starting to lay people off or take aggressive measures, they're really embracing the crisis. I think it's generally when you're shifting into this world that we're entering, it's for a lot of founders in the early stage, this is a big transition, and some will handle it better than others. The fear is that people don't react quickly enough. That's not to say, an old saying is you don't want to cut to the bone. You don't know where that is, but you don't want to cut so much that you remove muscle and you get to the bone is obviously what that is saying. But exactly as Ben said, this is a time where it's systemic. It's not idiosyncratic. And as a result, everything is on the table. And that's kind of what another slide before this was meant. It's just a framework. Again, a JP Morgan slide is just helping think through the prior. It's before, I think.
That's before. I don't know if I've got that one. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll add it in. Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. But it's really about how do you think through what's up to questions so that you could get ahead of this and you could decide how aggressive you want to be. But it's acknowledging that, the world in the future is going to be uncertain. How do we focus on our core business to some degree? In the past, it used to be how many growth opportunities do we have and how much do we invest in each of those areas? It's a little bit now about how do we make sure if we're in one of those challenged areas, how do we survive so we're still in the game when this thing gets behind us and we don't lose our opportunity to play? It's not about winning the game. It's really about withstanding this prolonged period and continuing on with your mission and doing it in a lower overhead, lower cost structure environment, because you just don't know what's to come. And you could decide when you go about it. But I've been impressed with some that have gone pretty aggressively and started questioning everything so that they could maximize their likelihood. But the longer you delay is just money that's going out the door that you will have a hard time getting back.
Right.
And there are some companies that I'm surprised have not reacted given the current situation. And there are others that have acted quite aggressively. Every company is going to have their own cadence, but acknowledging it and being prepared for it, I think, is important.
So I think that's worth talking about. And I don't know, Sonam, if you're willing to talk about some of the things that you've done at CareerList or Jenna at Harper Wild, or Sam and Renee or even Dan. One of the things that you talked about was not only are the companies that are experiencing sort of a cyclical, downturn. So CareerList, which is focused on, placement. I think we talked about it at the last call. Junior positions have basically completely dried up, but senior positions are continuing. We're going to be doing some interesting work in 2 weeks to talk about reboot. So as you reboot the company and the economy, how do you change how you hire? How do you change how you think about human capital? Both in terms of the cost of it and where it's located from, we've all been forced to learn how to do remote work, which we'll talk about in a second, which can change how companies can work in your cost management. But I don't know, Renee, on the other side of that, Gentrio, I think we talked about, is experiencing 137% week over week growth. But Jason and Ben are basically saying you guys should be not paying your rent as well, which is sort of an interesting counsel.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting time. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so 2 things. So number one, we went back to all of our contractors and said, either knock your rates in half or you're gone. And some of them came back and said, well, I'll go down 75%. We said goodbye. And we basically, this is where cash is king. But at the same time, we also have the talent that's available right now is absolutely incredible. So our new VP of marketing just wants to work for Equity because he's getting a package. He was helping Cole Haan do their IPO, and he was head of all their e-business initiatives. Now he's my VP of marketing, and he doesn't need the cash because of the packages and things that he's got. But we went from paying someone too much money because she was okay to now having someone who's absolutely stellar and not paying anything. And we've been trying to go back to all of our vendors and say, we want to grow in this market. We see a huge need for what we're doing, but we are going to be very smart with our cash, and we're going to be very aggressive with the talent that we get, because right now there is a huge pool of talent available, and we want to be there for you. We're not trying to be cheap. It's just that right now you need to help us survive this so that we come out of this all together in a great spot.
I appreciate you leaning in on that. I know it's not always an easy thing to talk about, but
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Sorry,
go
can I
ahead.
ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about this. Did you do the same thing also with lawyers, that you came back to them and said like, hey guys, I need a retainer. I can pay only half right now and half later. I'm asking because I really hope to use a lot of legal help soon, and it's going to require a lot of cash.
Very much so, yes. And you should go back to that. And then also from lawyers, there are a number of independent folks. Like right now, we have a lawyer who works for $100 an hour, but he's also willing to work for $50 an hour right now.
Wow.
And he's a really hungry lawyer. So if you go to some of the firms, like Chris Keefe is a good friend of mine who leads M&A at Dixon Peabody, they even understand that they have to cut back. But because there are so many guys that are out there that are independent lawyers that are just looking for anything because they can't see people in person now. So like in our world for estate planning lawyers, this is where we're trying to attack it as much as possible, saying, look, don't go in person and see people. But these other guys like Andre that I'd be happy to introduce you to that we work with, right now they're like, hey, it's work. Yeah, let's go.
Can he, sorry, like I don't want to switch over corporate lawyer because I'm very happy with him and it's hard for someone else.
Just go back to him. Nope, just go back to him and say, hey, you know what? This is where we're all at right now. And then I blame it on Chris and Luis every chance I can. And I'm not even kidding, but I say,
investors, yeah.
No, that's exactly what I say is, do you know the pressure we're getting from our investors? And even though Chris and Luis, we have these chats, but I say the pressure we are getting is unprecedented. So while at the same time we're supposed to grow, you need to understand right now that cash is king. And if I can't go back and tell people my plan for surviving the next 21 months, I'm not going to be here. So either you work with me now or I have to say goodbye. And that's where you just can't get around. You just say goodbye.
Can your lawyer review my terms and conditions, privacy policy, and everything else?
We'll connect you guys on
me afterwards. Yeah,
we'll connect on a sidebar. Before we switch topics, speaking of like cash is king and get it and keep it and don't spend it unless you have to. There's been a lot of talk over the last 2 weeks about the small business program PPP. There's equivalent programs up in Canada that I know Sarup is working for Senso. But Ben and Jason, can you talk about your thoughts on where we are on the PPP program? Should companies apply? How do they apply? And what's the likelihood of getting cash out of those programs?
Do you want to take that, Ben, as somebody who actually applied?
Yeah. Yeah. Brandon and I work with a bunch of companies that are exploring this, and they're exploring the affiliation rules and all kinds of things. So we don't have to get into that now. But the quick answer is, from what we heard is, if you've got under 500 employees and you don't, and you meet the affiliation rules, which can be kind of confusing, apply, absolutely. There's so many questions that left to be unanswered, even if you apply and are approved. When do you actually get the disbursements? Do you have to use those disbursements right away in case you don't have any operating expenses? So there's more difficult, my point is there's more difficult questions to answer actually if you get it. then can you get it? So you might as well get it now and worry about the details later. Obviously, the rules for minority-owned control companies are a little bit different than majority-owned control companies, and whether you have control rights. So for a lot of the VC firms on the line and et cetera, I hate to say it, it's almost a no-brainer. Just do it.
Yeah, I would agree. And just as an update, I've been hearing that, over the last week, a lot of confusion leading into the weekend. Banks didn't know how to make heads or tail. They didn't know who was going to buy it because this is basically them acting as an originator. The connection point to the SBA was broken. There was a lot of unanswered questions. And then throughout the weekend, more information has been published, both on answering some of these questions. Still lots of confusion. The actual conduit into the SBA has broken a few times. It's fixed. And now I've been hearing that folks are actually receiving checks. So as of yesterday and today, people are receiving checks, and it's a first come, first serve. I mean, there is far greater demand for this than supply, and so you should try and go and do your best, because it is confusing, and a lot of these well-funded companies are using legal help. Again, if you're trying to conserve costs, I would still approach it as best you can with your banker, and just try and submit it whenever you can.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of the portfolio companies, Ninth Decimal, weren't able to join because they're right in the middle of a customer call. But they did apply last week, did get approved for just under $2.4 million. And cash is arriving, this week. And I think by definition, most of us do not feel comfortable doing this. Just like you don't feel comfortable not paying your rent, just like you don't feel comfortable not paying your bills. But this is a pandemic. It is a very, very different time. And I think for all of us, until there is some certainty as to whether or not that this is a U or an L or what it is, getting the cash on your balance sheet, being great stewards of it is the number one job. And I really appreciate Ben and Jason reinforcing those messages. And supporting folks to the extent that they need support, thinking through this, which we're happy to kind of take offline. But before we...
Hey, Chris, this is Renee.
Hey, Renee.
For any of your women-led companies, there are a number of women grants going on right now, or if you're a women-led company and it's straight out cash. So I don't know who folks are there, but I can try to send you a list of all the things that we've applied to.
If you could, that'd be awesome. We tried to compile that full list, which we sent you guys that link. Both government and private sources.
Yeah, we found some new ones, so I'll shoot that to you.
Really appreciate it.
I'd love to get that list as well, if you'd mind.
Yeah, we'll be happy to share all of this back to all of you guys. So Ben, Jason, thank you for going through a very complex topic really quickly. I know you guys are both available to chat offline. Last topic for the day, guys, is I'm really pleased to have Alex Lazarow join us. Just published his book this week, Out Innovate. There is a chapter, I believe Meryl sent you guys the link to buy the book. So if you're read through your stack of what's interesting and you're thinking about, hey, what else can I read? Alex's book is absolutely fantastic. I think you'll enjoy it. Very similar to our thinking across the board. But there's a really great chapter and kind of talks about throughout these companies that have really figured out how to work remotely and distributed. And I think that's something that we're all working on, trying to get better at. And I thought I knew most of the stuff. I learned a whole bunch reading the book. So Alex, I don't know if there are any gems you want to share. I think we got you on mute, but there you go.
Yeah, happy to. And thanks a lot for having me in the kind words. I also am really appreciating the Zoom matrix and some serious Zoom backgrounds, including Adrian's Northern Lights, which I think I'm gonna have to up my background. But maybe what I'll do is I'll just the 2 minutes just on the book, why I wrote it, and high level on a couple of themes that I think are germane from the book to today's situation, and happy to share some resources as well after. So the title of the book is called Out Innovate: How Global Entrepreneurs from Delhi to Detroit Are Rewriting the Rules of Silicon Valley. And the thesis really is that everything we think we know about startup best practice is rooted in a time and a place, Silicon Valley and today, and for a very particular type of asset-light software-based company that wants to grow extraordinarily fast. And yet around the world, entrepreneurs are building startups and ecosystems that look different, and they're building different types of businesses. And I think that the best entrepreneurs operating in Toronto or Ottawa or Chicago or Amsterdam or Bangalore or Nairobi have more in common in many ways with the best entrepreneurs in Sao Paulo than they do with those in San Francisco. And yet no one is telling their stories. And so I ended up interviewing about 200 entrepreneurs from around the world, mostly folks that are leading, a couple $100 million, a couple $1 billion businesses, or that they've exited. And I've set up the book a little bit as this, look, there we have these conventional wisdoms in the Valley that we hold dear. I've been writing the book for about 2 years. I think like one of them is this idea of growth at any cost and what that looks like versus what I think are some of these emerging approaches that turn these philosophies on their head and what that means from a tactical perspective. And so for that example there, I coined this term of the camel, of building businesses with sustainability and resilience weaved into the business model from day one. Of course, that still means a focus on growth. And of course, that still means looking for network effects and all the things that make startups successful. But it also means, how do you actually think about sustainability and resilience from the day one and how you do it? Another theme that I explore, and this is kind of a macro observation, which is facing constraints and ecosystems that don't have kind of everything the Valley has, we can actually find creative solutions to these challenges, and that actually leads to a, in some ways, more successful business, and in many ways, a more resilient business. And the point that Chris was alluding to is around distributed teams. It's amazing. My Twitter feed is exploding with all everyone I know with their with the Zoom setups they're setting up right now as a reaction to the work from home time that we're in. But it's no surprise to me that the companies that have been the best at building distributed and to its extreme remote teams have been emanating from outside the Valley. And you think of Basecamp out of Chicago or Zapier out of Missouri or others. And I think that's a strategic choice for many of them. When you're looking for a head of, let's say, a CMO or something like that, I'm from Winnipeg in the middle of Canada. There aren't 50 of them the way there are in the Valley. There aren't 5 of them. And you often are forced to look outside and build a team around that person wherever you happen to find them. And the end result is the best practice around that is getting built outside of the Valley. And so anyways, the book tees up about a bunch of these. And as we think about navigating the current crisis and this really radical shift in the context that we're operating in many ways, the lessons on how to navigate it are not from an ecosystem of abundance, or in many ways are going to come from the best entrepreneurs who have scaled in some of the toughest ecosystems around the world. And so that's what the book catalogs. It actually just launched on Tuesday, which is pretty fun. Number one.
And, we do love the Resilient company. As you guys know, we focus a lot on capital efficient growth. But internally, we talk about our companies as crocodiles, not camels. But the concept is this similar idea, which is really resilient, awesome founders that know how to survive and thrive in different environments. And so, we've been really blessed. I've been talking to a lot of other VCs that are doing triage on their portfolios and talking about, half the portfolio not going to be here by June. But Alex, I just think it's going to be a tough cycle. And I think for companies that can be resilient, I love Renee's example of, hiring an awesome CMO that, before there's no way she would have any access to it. Alex, one of the things in the book that was interesting to me was this idea around hiring, a team versus A players, and sort of what does that look like? Because I think there's an opportunity in this crisis to make your team stronger. And I know a bunch of our CEOs and founders are trying to think through that dynamic. When you're asking somebody to take a 20% pay cut, how do you make a stronger team, through this? And what are sort of the things that you learned as you were reading through the book, or I was reading through the book, you were writing it?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where, I think there's conventional wisdom of you hire A players, and obviously hiring the best person you can in any situation is the right decision. But I think there's this mind shift around building an A team, and to me that's kind of starts with this idea of like churn of folks, which is in many ways in this ecosystem of the Valley where there's so much talent, it's built in, right? Like at Google, average tenure is less than 2 years. At Uber, it's like 13 months. It's built into the model, and so it's okay. But in many parts of the world, actually, it's this idea of how do you actually recruit from the get-go with a wider pipeline, and what are some approaches you can do with that. 2 is how do you actually think about retention and growth, both not just from the financial instruments that you offer and thinking beyond stock options, but also just really thinking about a long-term career. I spent a bunch of time with the Shopify team and the human resources team there, and Brittany Forsyth, who runs that team, talked a lot about how really their mantra was communicating that employees can do their life's work at the business. It's actually one of the reasons where, businesses exited, done very, very well, public company, and yet they've had very little churn so far. And one of the reasons they credit it is to some of the tactics they put in place. And frankly, this philosophical difference. And so it's across the gamut on some of the approaches, but yeah, totally, Chris, resonate with that shift in mindset.
So I'm sorry to short shift this conversation because it could fill up a full hour. Alex and I did an interview for 45 minutes that we're going to post as a vlog. So, it's a great appetizer for the book. And again, if you've gone through the pile, we'll send you a link to purchase it however you want, audio or otherwise. But there's some really great chapters, especially around remote works, reinforcing the team, and distance and distributed work and hiring for talent that I'd highly recommend. Bunch of other chapters also interesting, but certainly germane to what we're going through right now. So Alex, thanks for taking the time today.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. So just to wrap up, hopefully, on time, as we kind of look at that circle of, the family, the community, and what you're doing for yourselves as well as your companies, I just want to say, this community has continued to wow and inspire us. What they've done, both within their companies and working very diligently to survive and thrive the companies, but also while they're doing that, reaching out to their community, their family. I think sadly, maybe too many of you are neglecting yourself in that process. I want to thank Adrian again for kicking me in the ass and saying, look, we all have to look after ourselves and our family and our communities and their companies, and it's all important. So happy Passover. Enjoy your families for Easter. And we're going to do a Red Mass ride next Friday at 7:30 in the morning, led by Adrian. Hopefully you can join us. I want to thank Alex and Ben, Jason, and Dr. Rawlinson again for their contributions today. And stay safe, guys. Good to see you, and have a great weekend. And please let us know if there's anything we can do to help or any follow-ups. Happy to make those connections.
Thank you for having us, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Take care, everybody.
All right, guys. Take care.